Everyone who has spoken in this debate this afternoon. I think we've had an enthusiastic, energetic debate, and we've had some really good points. Secondly, can I say to those of you who've said law is not enough, that law does not totally capture what we're talking about, that there is something extra. I agree. This motion does not say that laws and regulation are the be-all and the end-all, the beginning and the end of good governance. What we're talking about is the basis, a foundation for good governance. Absolutely right of Ed to say that, of course, in a time of super platforms and artificial intelligence and so on, we have all the time to be looking to see what new laws and regulations are needed for a just society. That's why many people talk of corporate responsibility as a form of self-regulation, where a company voluntarily takes on a higher standard, a higher law and regulation for itself to move ahead of what is currently required. It's why when companies come together in things like the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative or responsible care and so on, these are forms of what are called collective self-regulation by companies. There's a whole academic sphere of thinking around the idea of partnered or collaborative governance, when governments around the world give blessing to these kinds of initiatives. So yes, of course, laws and regulations are not sufficient, but they're providing a basis. And it seems to me that what we really need to be thinking about is not that we're looking for perfect society, because there is no such thing as a perfect society, but what is the really important essence. And let's not get confused and try to confuse us a little bit, I think, by suddenly introducing qualifications to the motion about developing countries and things like that. Nowhere in the motion does it talk in those kind of qualifications. So let's vote on the basis of what the motion says, not what the opposition are trying to make us think the motion says. So ladies and gentlemen, I do urge you, whatever you voted before, change your mind now, go with the winning side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounded like a desperate plea to me. English is not my first language, but the title of this session is Good Governance is mainly about laws and regulations. The title is not Good Governance or Laws and Regulations is the be-all and end-all. That is not the title. So my understanding as someone who is not an English speaker as a first language is that we're talking here of good governance being very much dependent upon laws and regulations. I think the professor mentioned that companies take a higher standard compared to what is in the country. And having worked for Shell for many years, I'm very proud to say that Shell as a company has always taken whatever is a higher standard. If the higher standard is international compared to local, then we follow international. If the local is higher than international, which has happened in some respects in the country, then we follow the local because it's higher. Now, that is not simply about following the law when it comes to the local standards being lower than international. This is going back to the point where we are looking at the justice and ethics, as William has said, justice, because the law, there is a saying that the law sets the minimum standards of behavior, but ethics sets the maximum standards. So that's why when I said earlier that we cannot take cover with the fact that this is the law and we're following it and therefore, this is good governance. No, it cannot be sufficient. We as individuals, the companies we work for, must be looking at something much higher than that. And that can only be determined by the ethics, the values that we have in terms of how we operationalize anything or how we implement any law. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope for those who have voted against it earlier, you will not change your mind. For the undecided, you will vote against. And those who have misled and voted for it, think about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we vote, may I remind you that the motion is good governance is mainly about laws and regulations. If you vote for the motion, if you vote 1, you are saying, yes, I agree. If you vote 2, you are saying, I don't agree. And if you vote 3, you are undecided. Now, before the debate, 24% of you said, I agree. 63.6% of you said, I disagree. And 12.4% said, you were undecided. Now you have heard the arguments for and against, and now you will cast your vote. So, there's been a slight shift for the motion from 24%. Can we turn back? Yeah. So, before the debate, we had 24% agreeing. Following the debate, it went from 24 to 25.926. So the way we persuade people to join the debate is to assure them that there are no winners and losers. You will have to decide for yourself whether there is a winner or a loser. But for now, you should join me in thanking David Grayson and Ed Chua.
Edgar was debating in the conference just now about good governance is not just about rules and regulations. So tell us more about that.
Well, the topic was whether good governance is mainly about laws and regulations, and in my view, laws and regulations, good laws and regulations are important because they are an important pillar of good governance. But it's not mainly about that. No? It's really mainly about, to my mind, what is ethical, and because, as I mentioned earlier, there are laws which are not good because, for example, from a Western point of view, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and in some of the developing countries, we have laws which limit that. Now, the other thing is, technology is moving so fast that the laws cannot keep up. So you cannot say that because there is no law, you're not doing anything illegal. Yes, you're right, I'm not doing anything illegal, but is it ethical? So that's where the point of view of ethics and values come in. In the absence of a law, because technology is very fast, like Facebook, there's now a case, congressional hearing. So the laws cannot keep up with technology. So because that is a given, that the laws cannot keep up, then how do you then make sure that even without the law, you get good governance? And what kicks in is about a person's ethics and values, as well as, let's say, an industry. So there must be self-regulation as well.
Thank you very much. So, a theme at the conference is about reimagining the future. Do you think that, the future is going to benefit more of those who actually embrace technology, embrace the future, or is it going to be, marginalized for those who do not actually embrace the future?
I think it's really about embracing the future, because the future definitely will mean a lot of changes. And human nature is that when there is change, we are always afraid of change. But if we know that this change is going to happen, then instead of being afraid and resisting the change, we must try to see how we can influence the change and influence it in a positive way. I see many good things that can happen, which will be beneficial. Like technology can make access to medical and health for those in rural areas, like in Brunei. Although of course Brunei is so rich and advanced, but still there are areas outside the main urban centers where it's not so accessible. Yes, and especially in the Philippines, and there are many countries like that. So I'm hoping that technology will enable easier access to basic services like health, education, all these things, which right now makes it very difficult.
So do you think that businesses are at the moment ready to actually embrace technologies needed?
I think businesses are different companies are at different stages. I think we're not all at the same level. Some are quite advanced and they're leading the charge. Some are lagging behind. So it's very important that actually companies help each other. This is where again we go back to saying, hey, I can be a big brother or a big sister to another company and help them navigate this journey towards the future. Because I'm of the belief that instead of looking at others as competitors and maybe I don't want to share, if we create greater wealth, then that means everyone benefits. Can you imagine if the poor suddenly are their purchasing power increases, then they'll be buying more products from companies. Yeah, so it is in a company's interest to actually help make or take the poor out of poverty, because it will come back to them as a benefit. So that's where I'm coming from. So even for companies, small companies, help them. Show them the framework, the discipline, the processes which will make them successful.
So more on the sharing side, collaboration and all
And
that.
I think that's the strong part of Asians. Because Asians are quite used to consensus and sharing. It's the culture. Western culture are more individualistic. Yes, there's nothing bad about it. I think each one has its strengths and weaknesses. But in this case, I think it's easier for us to convince our Asian brothers and sisters that, hey, let's help each other, let's share. Yeah?
Okay. So one final question from me. If you could shape the future, how would you shape it?
I think I will start with making sure that the youth that we have right now have the right values. Because they can be very smart, they can create all kinds of technology, but if the values are not there, then that one will not be used for the greater good. So for me, it's very basic. We can be very fancy in terms of scientists, etc. But the starting point is, how are we shaping the hearts and minds of the youth so that they become very good and productive citizens who will then look at technology as a tool for making this a better world.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us.